Hey guys, welcome to Karenology. You won't believe how far some people will go to cause trouble. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the windows of my house as two officers stepped onto my driveway. Karen stood beside them, arms crossed over her floral blouse, her smug grin barely hidden. "He's been violating the Homeowner Association rules for weeks," she said, her voice dripping with false authority. "The babysitter is parking illegally, and I've warned him repeatedly." I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "She's parking in my driveway, Karen. My property. She's not blocking the street. She's not causing an issue. You have no right." "The Homeowner Association has the right to enforce its policies," she cut in, her eyes gleaming. "Driveways are meant for homeowner vehicles only. We can't have random people cluttering the neighborhood. It affects property values." One of the officers, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, turned to me. "Sir, do you have any paperwork proving your rights to use the driveway as you see fit?" "I own this house," I said, my frustration barely contained. "No one else has a say in who parks here. Unless there's a law against it, this is harassment." Karen scoffed. "We have documented complaints. The Homeowner Association Board has received multiple reports about this violation." The younger officer flipped through a notepad. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your Homeowner Association agreement. If it states that driveways are subject to regulations, we may have an issue." I clenched my fists. Karen knew damn well that I never signed any document restricting the use of my own driveway. But this was her game. Constant pressure, constant harassment, all designed to wear me down. She and the Homeowner Association had pulled the same stunt with my neighbor last year, bombarding him with ridiculous violations until he finally moved out. I wasn't going to be next. "I'll get my lawyer involved," I said, my voice steady. "Unless you can show me an actual law I'm breaking, you have no grounds to be here." Karen's smile faltered for a second before she recovered. "Suit yourself, but this will be reported to the Homeowner Association, and fines will follow, hefty ones." The officers exchanged a glance, then the older one nodded. "We'll file this as a civil matter for now. Just try to keep things from escalating." As the police left, Karen lingered, her expression shifting from smug to something more predatory. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Sell the house now, and you won't have to deal with this anymore." There it was. The real reason for her little war. Karen and her cronies on the Homeowner Association Board were trying to push me out, just like they had with the previous homeowners who refused to play by their rules. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You've underestimated me, Karen. I don't scare easy." She smirked. "We'll see." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the paperwork I had dug up from my files. Nowhere in the Homeowner Association guidelines did it say anything about driveway restrictions. Karen was bluffing, but that wouldn't stop her from making my life hell. A knock at the door startled me. When I opened it, I found a folded note on my porch. No signature, just 5 words written in shaky handwriting. "Check the Homeowner Association finances." My pulse quickened. Someone else in the neighborhood knew what was going on, and they wanted me to dig deeper. I didn't know who had left the note, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a parking dispute anymore. Karen was hiding something, and I was about to find out exactly what. The next morning, I walked out to find a fresh violation notice taped to my mailbox. "Unauthorized use of driveway. $250 fine," it read. I crumpled the paper in my fist, my jaw tightening. The escalation had started, just like I had expected. Later that day, I saw my babysitter, Emily, as she arrived. She hesitated before pulling into my driveway, looking over at Karen's house. "Are you sure this is okay?" she asked. "I don't want to get you into more trouble." "Ignore her," I said. "She doesn't have a legal leg to stand on." Emily nodded and parked. I watched from my porch as Karen peered through her blinds, phone already in hand. Within minutes, a car from the Homeowner Association's private security pulled up. The driver stepped out, a bulky man in a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on it. "Sir, I need to inform you that you're in violation of community parking policies. Your visitor's vehicle must be moved immediately, or additional fines may be issued." I folded my arms. "Tell Karen she's going to need a lawyer." The security officer hesitated. He wasn't a cop, just a hired enforcer, and he knew he had no real authority. He muttered something into his radio and drove off, but I knew this wasn't over. That night, I combed through my neighborhood's online records, trying to find anything on the Homeowner Association's finances. What I found was disturbing. Yearly dues had skyrocketed over the last 5 years, but there was no breakdown of where the money was going. Suspiciously large sums had been allocated to administrative expenses and the names attached to those expenses. Karen and 2 other board members. My heart pounded. This wasn't just about me. This was corruption on a neighborhood-wide scale. I wasn't just fighting for my driveway anymore. I was about to take on the entire Homeowner Association. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a car idling outside my house. Pulling back the curtain, I spotted Karen standing beside a black SUV, speaking with a man in a suit. She gestured toward my house, then my driveway, and the man nodded. My stomach tightened. Whatever she was planning, it was already in motion. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside, making sure they saw me. Karen turned, her lips curling into a satisfied smirk. "Good morning," she said, as if we were old friends. "I hope you're ready to cooperate today." "Cooperate with what?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Your latest attempt to strong-arm me out of my own home?" The man beside her adjusted his tie. "Mr. Lawson, my name is David Calloway. I'm a legal consultant for the Homeowner Association. We've been made aware of multiple violations on your property. The unauthorized use of your driveway, the inappropriate placement of your trash bins, and a failure to maintain uniform landscaping as required by the community guidelines." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you seriously listing my trash bins and lawn as a legal offense?" Karen clicked her tongue. "These rules exist to keep our neighborhood looking pristine. If we allow one person to ignore them, the entire community suffers." I stared at her, then turned my attention back to Calloway. "Let me guess. If I don't comply, I'll be fined into oblivion. And if I refuse to pay, you'll try to foreclose on my house." Calloway hesitated for half a second, but Karen jumped in. "Those are the consequences of refusing to abide by the agreement you signed upon purchasing your home." I narrowed my eyes. "I never signed an agreement that dictates who can park in my own driveway." "Oh, but you did," Karen said sweetly. "It was in the supplementary documents attached to your closing paperwork." I felt a cold rush of anger. I had combed through every page when I bought this house, and nothing like that had been included. If it had been slipped in later, it was fraud. "Then I'll have my lawyer review those documents. If there was any misrepresentation, this won't end well for you." Calloway's expression stiffened. Karen's smirk twitched. "I suggest you do that," she said lightly. "In the meantime, I'll be sending official violation notices. And expect a hearing with the Homeowner Association board soon." I exhaled sharply as they walked away. This was worse than I thought. If they had falsified documents, that meant they had been doing this to others as well. It wasn't just about harassing me. This was a coordinated effort to control who lived here. That evening, as I was reviewing my closing documents, a message popped up on my laptop screen. "Unknown user. Found something you should see." My heart pounded as a file attachment followed. The sender had no name, no identifiable email, just a blank void. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the file. A scanned document appeared on my screen. It was a ledger. Financial records belonging to the Homeowner Association. My eyes darted over the numbers, and my breath caught in my throat. There were massive, unexplained withdrawals labeled as community projects. Except no projects had been completed in years. The amounts were staggering, thousands of dollars missing. Unknown user, HOA is bleeding money. Karen is covering it up. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Whoever this was, they had access to confidential information. And if they were willing to share it with me, it meant Karen had made more than one enemy. Before I could respond, another message came through. Unknown user. Keep digging, but be careful. They know you're a problem now. I sat there, gripping the edges of my laptop. The fight had just become much bigger than a driveway dispute. And if I wasn't careful, it would turn dangerous. The following morning, I found another violation notice taped to my door. This time, it was for an unauthorized structural modification. Something about my mailbox not meeting Homeowner Association standards. My pulse spiked. They were piling on as many bogus fines as they could, hoping I would crack under the pressure. I decided to take action. I walked to the house of a neighbor who had lived here longer than I had, an elderly man named Frank. He opened the door cautiously, then sighed when he saw me. Let me guess. Karen's coming after you too. You've dealt with this before? I asked. He nodded grimly. She's been running this neighborhood like her own personal fiefdom for years. I fought her once. Nearly lost my house over it. Be careful, son. I leaned in. Do you know anything about the HOA's finances? Missing money? Frank's face darkened. I know enough to say you're playing with fire. Karen isn't working alone. The board is in on it, and they don't take kindly to troublemakers. I left his house with a sinking feeling in my gut. If Frank was right, I wasn't just fighting Karen. I was up against an entire corrupt system. And they were about to make my life hell. The pressure was mounting, and I knew I had to act fast. The Homeowner Association wasn't just harassing me anymore. They were setting the stage for something bigger. Something that would either force me to comply or break me completely. Karen's game was no longer just about a babysitter parking in my driveway. This was control, pure and simple. The next morning, I found 3 more violation notices taped to my door. Lawn not up to community standards, unauthorized storage unit in backyard, and noise complaint registered against the homeowner. I laughed bitterly. My lawn was freshly cut. I didn't own a storage unit, and I barely spoke to my neighbors, let alone threw loud parties. This was Karen tightening the noose. I pulled out my phone and called the number listed on the notices. A woman answered in a clipped, formal tone. Homeowner Association office. How can I help you? Yeah, I'd like to dispute some violations I just received, I said, already knowing this was a waste of time. Your name and address? She asked. I gave it to her, and after a moment, she responded. Yes. You have several outstanding violations. Are you calling to make a payment? No, I said, gritting my teeth. I'm calling to dispute them. I don't have a storage unit. My lawn is fine, and I'd love to know who filed a noise complaint against me. All complaints are anonymous, sir, and our community standards must be upheld. If you wish to contest the fines, you'll need to attend the next Homeowner Association hearing. When is it? 2 weeks from now, but please be aware that failure to pay your outstanding balance before then may result in further penalties. I hung up. 2 weeks was more than enough time for them to bury me under more bogus fines. Karen was playing dirty, but she wasn't the only one with a few tricks up her sleeve. That night, I decided it was time to take this fight to the next level. I called Frank, my elderly neighbor who had warned me before. Frank, do you know anyone else who has had trouble with Karen and the HOA? There was a pause. Plenty of people, son, but most of them left. She hounded them until they either sold their homes or gave in. I need names, I said. Anyone still here who might be willing to talk? Frank sighed. There's a couple at the end of the street, the Ramirez family. They nearly lost their home over a bunch of made-up violations. And then there's Mark Benson. Used to be on the board until Karen pushed him out. I took down the names and addresses. Thanks, Frank. I appreciate it. Just be careful, kid. Karen's got more power than you think. The next day, I visited the Ramirez family. They were hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation, but after some coaxing, they shared their story. Karen had systematically fined them for absurd reasons. Christmas lights up too long, a mailbox 2 inches too tall, a non-approved shade of paint on their shutters. The fees stacked up until they were forced to take out a loan just to keep their home. It was extortion, plain and simple. Then I met Mark Benson. He was in his 60s, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a deep resentment toward Karen. She wanted full control, he told me. When I started questioning where all the HOA funds were going, she orchestrated a vote to remove me from the board. Next thing I knew, I had fines coming in left and right. She knows how to push people until they crack. I showed him the ledger I had received from the anonymous hacker. He studied it carefully, then let out a low whistle. This is damning. If this gets out, she's finished. That's the plan, I said. But I need more. Hard proof that can't be explained away. Mark tapped his fingers against the table, deep in thought. There's a storage unit. Karen and her inner circle use it for records. You find that, you find everything. A surge of adrenaline shot through me. Where is it? A few miles out of town. It's listed under her husband's name. No HOA record should be stored off-site like that. If you can get inside, you'll find what you need. That night, under the cover of darkness, I drove out to the storage facility. It was a small, nondescript lot, the kind of place no one would think twice about. I found the unit number Mark had given me and parked nearby, waiting. No security cameras, no guards. Either Karen was sloppy, or she never expected anyone to come looking. I picked the lock, a skill I had picked up in my younger years, and slipped inside. Boxes were stacked high, labeled in Karen's neat handwriting. I pulled one down and flipped through its contents. HOA financial reports, fraudulent maintenance invoices, records of fines that had never been legally filed. It was all here, the proof I needed. I took as many pictures as I could, my hands shaking. Just as I was about to leave, headlights swept across the lot. My stomach dropped. Someone was here. I ducked behind a stack of boxes as the vehicle pulled up outside the unit. The engine cut off, and a car door slammed. Footsteps approached. My heart pounded as I recognized the voice. Karen. She muttered something under her breath as she unlocked the unit. I could hear papers rustling as she rummaged through the files. If she found something missing, she would know someone had been here. I couldn't let that happen. I spotted a side exit at the back of the unit. Moving slowly, I slipped through it, keeping low as I sprinted to my car. My pulse hammered in my ears as I started the engine and peeled away. Headlights off until I was far enough not to be seen. I had what I needed. Now I just had to figure out how to use it without getting crushed in the process. Driving away from the storage unit, my mind raced. I had the proof I needed, but that didn't mean I was safe. Karen had already proven she wasn't afraid to play dirty. If she even suspected that someone had been inside that storage unit, she would come down on me with everything she had. I had to act fast, and I had to be smart. I pulled into my driveway, cut the engine, and just sat there for a moment. The neighborhood was quiet, but it felt different now, like I could feel Karen's eyes watching me from behind her perfectly manicured hedges. I needed a plan. I needed allies. I needed to make sure that when I made my move, it would be checkmate. The first thing I did was call Mark Benson. He answered on the second ring. "Did you get it?" "I got it," I said. "Financial records, fraudulent maintenance invoices, all of it. I have enough to take Karen and the entire HOA down." There was a pause. "That's good," he said finally. But there was something in his voice, hesitation, maybe even fear. You need to be careful. If Karen finds out, she won't just try to fine you out of the neighborhood. She'll ruin you. I know, I said. That's why I need to move before she does. I spent the next 2 hours scanning every document, backing up every file onto encrypted drives, and sending copies to an external cloud storage. If Karen thought she could bury this, she was dead wrong. But I needed to decide how to play this. If I went to the police, there was a chance they would brush it off as a civil matter. If I went public, Karen would have time to spin the narrative in her favor. I needed something undeniable. Something she couldn't talk her way out of. And then it hit me. The HOA hearing. Karen had set up a hearing for me in a week, thinking she would have the final say on my supposed violations. What if, instead of defending myself, I flipped the script? What if I exposed her in front of the entire neighborhood? I had to make sure everyone saw what was really going on. The next day, I went door to door, speaking to every homeowner I could. Some were hesitant, afraid of retaliation, but others were eager to listen. The Ramirez family had already been targeted, and once they saw the records, they were fully on board. Frank, my elderly neighbor, nodded solemnly as he flipped through the documents. I always knew she was crooked, he muttered. But this is something else. By the time the hearing rolled around, I had gathered a small but determined group of neighbors who were ready to stand against Karen and her corrupt board. The meeting was held in the community center, a place usually reserved for HOA events and neighborhood gatherings. The board sat at the front, Karen in the center, looking as smug as ever. I walked in, carrying a folder thick with evidence, and took my seat. Karen tapped a manicured nail against the table. Mr. Lawson, you are here today to discuss multiple violations against your property. As you have refused to pay the fines, this hearing will determine whether further action is necessary, including legal recourse. I leaned back, letting her talk. She loved hearing her own voice. The longer she spoke, the more power she thought she had. Do you have anything to say in your defense? She finally asked, tilting her head like a cat playing with its food. Actually, I said, placing the folder on the table, I do. But it's not about my so-called violations. It's about yours. Karen's smile twitched. Excuse me? I stood and began passing out copies of the financial records. These are documents showing exactly where the HOA money has been going. Large sums of money have been disappearing under community projects that never happened. And guess whose name is attached to every single one? The room fell silent. Karen's face paled just slightly, but she recovered fast. This is ridiculous, she snapped. Fabricated nonsense. Then why is there a storage unit under your husband's name full of records just like these? I asked. Records that show years of fraudulent activity? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Even the other board members were shifting uncomfortably. I don't have to sit here and listen to baseless accusations, Karen hissed. She turned to Calloway, the HOA's legal consultant. David, shut this down. But Calloway was flipping through the papers, his expression unreadable. Karen, he said slowly, we need to discuss this in private. No, we don't, I said, because I'm not the only one who's seen these documents. Several homeowners have copies, and more will by the end of the night. Karen shot up from her chair. You think you can waltz in here and take over? This is my community. I built this. No, I said, meeting her glare. You stole from it, and it's over. The board voted that night to suspend Karen pending an independent audit. Calloway distanced himself immediately, saying he had no knowledge of financial misconduct. The rest of the board, smelling blood in the water, followed suit. Karen stormed out, but the damage was done. The truth was out, and her reign was coming to an end. I walked home that night knowing the fight wasn't over. She would try to claw her way back. But for now, I had won the first real battle. and I wasn't stopping until she was gone for good. Karen's fall from grace should have been the end of it. After the hearing, the board distanced themselves. The homeowners finally saw the truth, and the audit was set to expose the full extent of her corruption. But people like Karen don't go down without a fight, and I knew she would find a way to strike back. The next morning, I woke up to find my mailbox smashed to pieces, my trash cans overturned, and a fresh violation notice taped to my door. Pending review of your ongoing infractions, your standing within the Homeowner Association remains under scrutiny. No signature, no official letterhead, just a crude, desperate attempt to rattle me. I wasn't the only one. Over the next few days, other homeowners who had supported me found themselves dealing with sudden complaints against them. The Ramirez family got a notice demanding they repaint their home. Frank received a fine for an unauthorized lawn ornament, a ceramic owl he had owned for years. Karen was pulling every string she had left, hoping to create enough chaos to cover her tracks. I called Mark Benson. Karen's still at it. She's trying to intimidate people. Mark sighed. Not surprising. The audit results should be ready in a few days. She knows the clock is ticking. We need to make sure she doesn't do more damage before then, I said. If she's still sending out notices, that means she still has access to HOA resources. We need to cut her off. Mark agreed to meet with the remaining board members to discuss revoking Karen's access. But Karen wasn't going to sit back and let that happen. That night, I was walking back from Frank's house when I noticed a car parked down the street. Its headlights were off, but I could see the faint glow of a lit cigarette inside. Someone was watching me. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the license plate. As I pretended to type a message, the engine started and the car peeled away. I had no proof Karen was behind it, but it didn't take a genius to put the pieces together. The next day, the audit results came in. The findings were worse than anyone expected. Over the past 5 years, Karen had embezzled over $200,000 from the HOA budget. Fraudulent contractor invoices, false maintenance fees, and personal expenses disguised as community improvements. The evidence was overwhelming. I walked into the emergency HOA meeting with a thick stack of papers. Homeowners filled the room, whispering amongst themselves. Karen sat at the front, her posture stiff, her jaw clenched. Calloway, the legal consultant, cleared his throat. After reviewing the financial discrepancies, we have no choice but to report these findings to law enforcement. Effective immediately, Karen Mitchell is removed from her position within the Homeowner Association. Karen stood, slamming her hands on the table. This is a witch hunt. I have done more for this community than anyone in this room. Frank, normally a quiet man, spoke up. You stole from us, Karen. You used us, and you thought no one would ever catch you. For the first time, Karen looked unsure of herself. The board members, who had once feared her, now avoided eye contact. The power she had wielded so confidently was slipping through her fingers. You have no proof, she snapped. These accusations. Mark dropped a thick file onto the table. We have bank statements, signed authorizations, emails. The proof is all here, and we've already sent copies to the authorities. Karen's face drained of color. You think you can do this to me? I'll sue every single one of you. Go ahead, I said. But you'll be fighting that battle from a jail cell. The room erupted in murmurs. Karen turned on her heel and stormed out. The moment she was gone, an exhale of relief passed through the crowd. It was over. The nightmare that had controlled this neighborhood for years was finally coming to an end. 2 weeks later, Karen was officially indicted on multiple charges of fraud and embezzlement. The HOA board dissolved itself, and a new community-led group was formed to manage neighborhood affairs. The bogus fines and violations were revoked, and homeowners were finally free from Karen's reign of terror. I stood on my porch, watching as a moving truck pulled up in front of Karen's house. She had been forced to sell. As she stepped outside, our eyes met for a brief moment. She glared, but there was no power behind it anymore. She had lost. Frank walked up beside me, shaking his head. Never thought I'd see the day. Me neither, I admitted. But we did it. He chuckled. So what's next? I looked around at the neighborhood, now free from the suffocating grip of Karen's rules. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, we just live. And for the first time since this battle began, I finally felt at peace.